resilience means basically discipline. And then secondly is to take criticisms constructively. Then you'll be more resilient.
And this is from a personal context, but also in the context of your job as a professor and scholar, yeah?
Exactly. As a professor, of course, we do two things. We do research, we teach, because academic research is a rigorous process. So you do your research, you submit your work, whether it's a book or a research article. So it goes through a very rigorous refereeing process. And very often, your work will be rejected by the journal or the publisher, and then you get the referee reports, which are more often critical. So you have to really to be able to take their criticisms in a constructive way. So you don't take them too personally. You try to revise your work to make your work better, and then to resubmit the work to another journal. So the process can be very long and it can be very painful, and nobody likes to hear criticism. But in the end, the process actually helps you to improve your work. And also in terms of discipline is extremely important, because doing research and writing up your research, it can be very painful. And sometimes you hit the writer's block. And you can easily give up, or at least you stop your work to do something else. But that's okay. But then still, to finish your work, you really have to persevere. You have to be very disciplined. I remember when I was writing this book, Catching Up to America, because to write a book, it's a long process. I have other work to do. I have to teach. I have admin work. So if you are not disciplined, you can never finish a book.
In terms of your resilience and strength in taking criticism, have you always had that, or you kind of get stronger over time?
Of course, it varies across among people. In the beginning, of course, you thought your paper was great, and then you got rejection. You are just a junior professor. You have to publish. So of course, then you go back to your work and you try to figure out how to improve your paper. And eventually, of course, you are going to get better, and you are going to see things more objectively and more constructively. It's never easy. In any case, it's never easy to take criticism as well, because it's just human nature. But that's also your motivation. Basically, you try to reduce the times you are going to get rejected. So you try to do better work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You try to sort of accelerate the improvement process.
Exactly.
And the sense that I get from you is that you must have a willing mind, right? A willing heart to actually be open to criticisms.
Yeah. That's what you have to do. Yeah. Also, it's the same with teaching. Most, if not all, professors also care a lot about their teaching. Very few, at least, were born or naturally born good teachers. So how do you learn? Obviously, you don't do well in the beginning. And of course you get criticisms or negative comments from students. I knew a few people who like to blame the students for their bad ratings, but that's never a solution, because then that means you are not going to improve. So you can never blame students. You have to not blame yourself. You have to basically, there must be some problems with your
So there's a certain truth in what the students have
students may not be fair or may not be right in their comments, but still, if you receive a lot of negative comments, something must be wrong. So you have to think about how to improve it.
I guess the landscape here in China as well, that you mentioned, that students' evaluation in classes, right?
I think that's true also, like in the US, in some other places. But in terms of student evaluating professors right after their classes, I think that applies to probably most schools in the US and also in China. But the difference is that normally in business schools, students care a lot more about their classes and the teaching quality of the professors, especially like MBA, EMBA programs. Many schools, of course, say that they care about both teaching and research to their professors. But few schools actually do that. Some schools just care about only research or only teaching. Of course, most good schools, of course, care about research. a lot more than teaching. But at CEIBS, we really try to balance between teaching and research.
But I would like to maybe dive deeper into what does it take to be a good teaching professor in China, especially in today's climate, in a business school context, perhaps?
Yeah, of course, first of all, you have to care. You have to care about teaching. You have to care about your students. Basically, you have to care about what the students think. So I think CEIBS, that's the norm. And secondly, you have to know your audience. Basically, you have to know your students, know who they are, because different programs have different kind of students. Like MBA students are younger generally, and they are full-time, and they have different backgrounds. And when you teach, you have to ask yourself, why should the students care about what I'm doing now? Basically, for every slide, everything that you do, every case you ask them to do, you have to ask yourself, why should the students care about this? So what's
putting
their
yourself
motivation?
in their shoes.
Exactly, that's very important. That's what I call relevance. Even in the business school, students have curiosity. They don't just come here to learn just practical skills. Of course, they care about practical skills, but they also have curiosity. So if you can address students' curiosity, that's also like a relevance. Thirdly, of course, it's just like your like a presentation skill. You try to how do you deal with students' questions well, and how to do you like pace your lecture to make it more interesting, or to have some jokes, to spice up the atmosphere.
Have you tried that, like jokes?
Of course. We plan jokes in our teaching.
I look forward to hearing one joke from today's interview, Professor.
I didn't plan any joke today, but sometimes it comes out naturally.
Naturally,
okay.
Yeah. No, but I really love your 3 points, right? Like you said, first is you have to care.
Care, yeah.
Second, you have to know your audience, or I guess in the business world, it's know your customer.
Know your customers.
Put yourself in their shoes. Why should they care about these cases? So relevance.
Exactly.
And third, presentation skills. And these are not built overnight, right? Over time.
Of course, you have to learn from your senior professors, those who are more experienced, and some professors are naturally better professors. Sometimes it's just a matter of perspective. Like, how do you do teaching? Do you like use a more deductive process, like to have like concepts and then logic and then conclusions? That's normally not the right way to do things. More inductive process is easier. It's more natural for people to learn. You do a case first, or do some examples first, and then you make students interest, and then you give them then you have discussions, then you give them the framework, the theoretical insights. And that's so in general, that's a better way of teaching. So skills, of course, can be acquired over time. In a sense, as long as you are willing to improve, you can always improve. Yeah.
Wow. Well said.
Yeah, that's so then you become resilient in a sense.
Yeah. So this is it's not like a one crisis, but it's more of like growing through a journey, and you sort of build that resilience over time.
Yeah. Before you teach, you still feel kind of nervous, So you always think about, how do I proceed? What should be my first sentence? How do I get into the flow? And you look at your materials again and again. I think in Broadway, I think even good actors, I think they are also they get nervous every time.
Right.
And they practice hard.
And for you as well, after doing it for so many years, right? How many years have you been teaching in total?
Oh, for me, it's close like 28 years.
28
I've been here for CEIBS, already 18 years in
18
CEIBS.
years. Okay, so 10 years elsewhere,
Yeah, in Hong Kong,
Hong Kong. And you still get nervous sometimes, for you as well, after 28 years?
I mean, it's of course maybe not that nervous. Basically, you still feel like, okay, I have to get myself ready. So I have to concentrate, and to get into the mood.
Yes. Professor Zhu Tian, I want to bring it back to the criticisms part, right? Could you give us an example of maybe that one time where you received, perhaps, it could be a harsh feedback, criticism?
Of course, I do have such a case or incident, maybe 15, 16 years ago. It wasn't my first class, it was maybe my 10th class already. Once the class was over, And in the evening, I received a lengthy email from a student in the class. Basically, he told me that my class wasn't good. Students were very disappointed and about this and this and this. But that's not it. The email was long, but he actually gave me a very long list of suggestions. So he said, for this part, you could have done this.
Oh, wow.
So, and in a positive way, he's not really mean. It's not mean at all, because otherwise, what's the point? He tries to really to make me feel good, but then still, he says, so this, you could have done this. Yeah. We have this student could have shared their experience when you were teaching this concept. And you could have done a game, you could have designed a game before this, and a very long list of suggestions. But of course, some suggestions were not practical or were not probably were not really relevant. And then I kind of knew what I did wrong. It wasn't really something big. Just somehow I think when I was dealing a certain concept, I didn't deal with the student questions very well. I guess I took their questions too lightly. And then student didn't believe my answer, and basically I think I lost my credibility. So once you lose your credibility, and whatever you do, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. But then, so I think that was the key, because I was teaching before the class, the class went just okay, no problem. So then I thought back, okay, that maybe was the key. But then, so a lot of the suggestions from the student probably were not really relevant, were not really true. But still, there were some suggestions that were actually very, very good, which would improve my teaching. So I took a lot of suggestions from the students and kind of redesigned the sequence, or even I actually then designed a game to play in the game, and then just a week later, so I taught another class. I get to complete turn around the students' reading.
Nice.
Of course, when I received the email, of course I felt very depressed, because I didn't even know. I wasn't even aware that the class didn't go well. Then I went back the next day and to reread the email and try to figure out what. You're calmer now. Then you reread the email. Then you try to see where you can improve. So I think that was very helpful to me in the end. And also I thank the student afterward. Right away I thank the students. There's a Chinese idiom, a 成语, 闻过则习. You know this idiom, 闻过则习.
Okay.
So you should feel happy when you hear people point out your shortcomings. That makes sense, because normally people are polite. People don't try to point out your shortcomings. So you never realize your shortcomings. It's like what I wasn't even aware that the class didn't go well. Right? So it's good that there are people who are willing to point out to you what you could do better. That's, in a sense, that's how you improve. So I think the attitude of 闻过则习 will go a long way to anyone, I think.
That's wisdom, very
that's
philosophical.
Our ancient Chinese wisdom.
Love it. 闻过则习.
闻过则习.
You could think about it also, for example, the student, whatever he or she said may not be representative of the class, but that is probably secondary.
Yeah, that's secondary, exactly.
And also, I guess, the ability to take criticisms also has to be mindful. You will read, but you kind of have to also think it through, right? Whether, does it make sense? And not just take everything at face value.
You cannot do that. In a sense, they're talking about this from their perspective, but they may not be correct. But regardless, there must be some problem. The past policies seem to me have been unfavorable to investment. So a lot of policies try to somehow reduce the rate of investment in China and to try to increase the rate of consumption in the economy. It's everything. It's consumption and the investment and export. And export has not been a problem for China over the past few years, because Chinese exports have actually grown faster than the whole economy. And the consumption has been lagging, but not lower than the GDP growth. So what has dragged the Chinese economy down has been the sharp decline in in investment, especially private investment. So that means private entrepreneurs are not, confident about their future. So if you actually go out to talk to private companies, and you are going to find out that there is a clear bias in favor of state-owned enterprises. That may not be the official policy. So the central government never had that policy. The central government has always said that we want both the state sector and the private sector to do well. And we want to promote both of them. But somehow in practice, SOEs are clearly favored.
More so right now than the past?
Yeah, of course. More so in the past, in recent years. That's a problem that you can deal with. You can solve those. These are policies that you can change. So if we do adjust the policies, then I think the Chinese economy will again bounce back. It'll be, in a sense, resilient. In spite of all these short-term debt problems. Debt, in a sense, is a sunk cost, in a sense. It belongs to the past.
And confidence is not an easy thing to rebuild, right? I guess. I love that. Does this sort of also link to your book? Because you mentioned here that the resilience of the Chinese economy has been often underestimated in the past. Do you still hold this belief?
Yeah, of course. Because when people give a pessimistic reading about the Chinese economy, that's typically when the Chinese economy was in a downturn. So you have to look at the longer term. So the longer term growth in China, in a sense, has always been underestimated, in the sense that nobody believed that China would be like this today, right? 40 years ago, nobody would had predicted that China would become the fastest growing economy in the world. Because superficially, if you use the traditional framework, China not a 100% market economy. Private property rights are not fully protected, at least not formally, right? And then, of course, there are bureaucracies and corruption and everything. But in spite of these factors, China has done well. Those, in a sense, things that are not good for growth are not unique to China. They are almost commonplace in all developing countries. And it's easy to talk about this, but most countries don't have a good high savings rate. Then, of course, we value education so much. So this is very crucial because education is the key, of course, to human capital accumulation and to acquiring technologies, advanced technologies, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Some people thought that, China has just relied on copying technologies from other countries. So that's no wonder why you grow fast. But every country can do that. All developing countries, Mexico, the Philippines, they can all do that. But it's not that easy. To copy somebody's technologies is not an easy thing to do. There must be some basic capacity so that you can do that. To acquire new technologies, you have to have the people who are able to understand the technology, to use the technology. Also, you have to have money. Because technologies take money to buy, to purchase. So that's why you have to have savings.
And I guess for the copying part, one is maybe you can import people who know it, or you can train your own people to do it, right? So the last 40 years, China 40 years ago and China right now, it's different, right?
Because of course, completely different. China was actually, I would say, was the poorest economy 40 years ago in the world. The poorest. There are maybe one or two countries that were poorer in Africa, but then basically you can say China was the poorest. How poor was China? Basically, because I went through that period. I was growing up during the period when China was extremely poor. I think the majority of the Chinese people were somewhat hungry all the time. Of course,
not enough food, or not enough money to buy food.
Not enough food, of course. Of course, not. It's the same thing. Not enough money to buy food, of course, because there wasn't enough food. I think even in 1989, when I went to the U.S., didn't feel like I had enough meat to eat. I think a small minority of people had enough meat for their diet. But of course, now we have too much meat.
It's interesting, I guess, heartening to hear from you, because you had the first-hand account of seeing China's rise, right? Even at one point you mentioned that you experienced some sort of hunger.
Basically, I went to bed every day starving. Even
a
in
great college, by the way. You went to top
Tsinghua.
schools.
I went to
Tsinghua.
Tsinghua. We got stipend even for. We didn't have to pay tuition. We got stipend, but still there was a ration. So every month you can only get so much food. Peasants were worse. I had relatives in the countryside. I would go to the countryside during the summer.
Yeah.
And they actually eat kanjis.
And porridge, we call it in Malaysia.
Porridge, yeah. Every meal, that's it. So, and a very porridge with very little rice. I'm not from coming from Guizhou or somewhere. It's Jiangsu.
Even then already
along
you did
the Yangtze
experience.
River. So very.
I can imagine those who are the landlocked areas.
Exactly.
Even
so
more.
Now it's one of the richest areas in
Yes.
China. It's not like I was coming from a backward place, and both my parents were working, had salaries.
Yeah.
So I was lucky in a sense compared to my cousins.
But even then
in the
already,
countryside.
right? The stark contrast of how China
exactly.
was 40
think
years
about
ago.
A college student at Tsinghua didn't have enough to eat.
Wow.
And I was so skinny back then. Yeah.
But you were aiming for top schools in China. I mean, I guess you've done very well.
Percentage of young people who can go to college, of course, back then, 40 years ago, it was much lower. Like in my in the city that I was from, we had about 500,000 people, total population. Very few people were eligible to take the college exams. 500-600 people were eligible eventually to take the exam. Yeah. So in the end, 200 students got into college from 500,000 people. Of course, it's a very low percentage, lower than 1%.
Yeah.
So in that sense, college education was more restrictive, but wasn't as competitive as today, because now more people are taking college exams.
Yeah.
And of course, to fight for a place in a top schools, it's harder. And also, I think 40 years ago there were no college rankings. We knew that Tsinghua was a good university.
It's just that it wasn't.
Yeah, but not really better than Jiaodao or any other university. So we didn't really care so much about which university to go to, because to go to any university was
in itself a milestone.
Was great.
Yeah.
So that's why we were not as competitive in a sense as it is now. Now, because there's a clear ranking and everyone wants to go to this university. I think people pay too much attention to college ranking because it doesn't really matter in the end. It's who you are. It's not what college you go to that matters.
So when you say who you are, do you mean as your character?
Your character, of course, your talent,
values,
your natural talent, your character, your anything, just who you are, whatever that is.
That's fantastic. Coming from someone who has graduated from top schools and yet you remain level-headed. It's actually very refreshing.
Of course, when you see, so many people are from Tsinghua, are from Beida, of course they get the best people. Of course, they are supposed to be better than other schools. But then you look around, you see a lot of successful people who are not graduates of those schools. That means it's not the school. And there has been quite a few researches that try to show that there may be some advantages right in the beginning when you look for a job. Okay, if you are from a better school, maybe you get a slight advantage. But then if you're from a lesser school, but you are the best student in that school, I think you still get a good chance.
Yeah.
And so in the end, of course, even if you get a job, and then how well you do it is the key, right? So in that sense, so graduate schools to a certain degree matter a lot more than colleges.
Would like to ask maybe a final wrap-up question. If you were to remove your hat as an economist, what is the China that you envision to live in, perhaps in the future, or for your children?
So I think we have to differentiate between my wish or my prediction. But then, of course, it's always difficult to predict the future because so many things can happen, and then it can change whatever prediction you have. If China stays the course of marketization, opening up, then I think the Chinese economy will be resilient in the sense that the Chinese economy can still grow relatively faster than almost all other countries in the world. In that sense, China can still grow at 5% or even 6% a year sometimes, over a sustained period of time, like for 15 to 20 years. So even 5% a year for 20 years or for 15 years is a very rapid growth. The world's average is only like 2%. So 15 years from today, China will be again a different country. But then of course that's not guaranteed. I hope that China will, because that's China's potential. I think China's potential is 5% or more.
Yeah, and when you say marketization, reform and opening up, these words have been used, right? We read them. But to you, what does it mean to you? For example, do you have something specific where we can relate to when you mean opening up? In what sense?
Yeah, because in recent years there is a feeling that that the country is not as open for some people as we thought we should be. The private sector is not as well regarded as it should be. So I think that we should do better in those regards. So we should give the private sector a lot more confidence and a lot more room, a lot more respect, a lot more protection. And then again, now of course there are these geopolitical tensions, which we have to deal with very well. Because of course the Americans are imposing certain restrictions on technology transfer, but those are just a few technologies, and they impose some restrictions on a very select few companies. So we cannot base our industrial policies just on this fact alone. Because if we try to really rely on ourselves in all so-called key areas, because there are so many key areas. Which ones are key areas? Then basically, so we are going to have a lower level specialization. So it's going to slow down our growth, basically. I don't want that to happen. You don't want to get into a hot war. Of course, you want to have a friendly relationship with most countries in the world. So if we can do that, I think China can still have a long way to go. And that's one thing economically. On the other hand, I also wish that, for my children, I wish that China would be socially and politically a more open, more liberal place to live. Because the world is moving towards a more open, more liberal society, more rule of law. You know what I mean? Of course, because economy is one thing. Money is only one aspect of life. Other things are also quite important. Values, rights, liberties, justice. Those are all those things that we value. And in a sense, those belong to the core values. So China has this system of core values. And we should work on those too.
Thank you so much, Professor Zhu Tian. I really had a good time.
Thank you. Good questions.